All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Ryan Kelly-Burnett. We're at Dominio IV. It's May 13th, 2021. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
First question, most important question, as you know, is why wine?
Oh, probably the beer. But no, I think it's obviously a deep, rich history, but I also kind of look at it like it's the greatest reality TV show that can't really be filmed. And so you look at the layers, but like being able to capture it in just, an hour segment, it's impossible. The personalities, the stories that go into one bottle of wine, and the depth that it takes just to get to that, and how many people go into that one bottle. I think that story is sometimes overlooked and kind of focused on one person instead of the whole picture. Mm-hmm. So it's innovative, it's creative, and it's a weird lifestyle addiction.
Tell us a little bit about your kind of pre-wine life, upbringing and education.
So I grew up just outside of Atlanta, in a little town called Covington, Georgia. I grew up on a kind of private hunting club, so I had a lot of access to land and a good time for first kind of 10 years of my life. And yeah, it was, a little bit more of my redneck days, I would call them. But it was definitely just a good kid-friendly environment, and, had a lot of fun. And then we moved into town kind of right around when I turned about 11. And so you kind of transition from that into kind of turning into a townie. And it was just a different chapter. And, you miss the farm life, but then you kind of developed a better friendship because you're closer to people. But yeah, it was a good time.
Did you have an idea what you wanted to do when you grew up?
I went through everything. Like when I was living on the farm, I thought I was gonna become like a professional skeet instructor. Just shooting clay pigeons and doing all that. And then I thought at some point I wanted to be a chef, and then it was a history teacher, and then through all the works, and then you kind of get to the end of it and you're like, I don't know what I want to do. So I graduated, I went to uni for a couple years, and then it was actually my mom who kind of pushed me to, she was like, why don't you take a gap year and go do a harvest, because she had just gotten back from New Zealand, where that side of the family is from, and kind of had seen some stuff from Hawke's Bay in the Napier area. And she was like, all right, let's see if we can land you a spot somewhere. So I'm still on my gap year. But I left in 2009, and I did my first harvest at Carlo and Julian, Felix, Madrid. And that was it was like the perfect environment, like from vine to the winery, you were doing it all. And then not the complicated, like it was boutique-y. And Felix, you definitely pushed me in the right direction, and we made some fun wines. Mm-hmm. So,
tell me about that first harvest. Tell me about your kind of initial impressions of the work.
I mean, it was kind of what I was used to. Like, our family always has been like, just a kind of, grind it out, get after it, just get in there and get your hands dirty. And so I felt very comfortable in it. And I think that's why I still do, because it is physical, but then it's also being able to express yourself creatively. And so that first one, like I drive across the country with my cousin, drop him off at the airport, and I'm like, oh man, I'm alone. Like I am on the West Coast and I don't know anyone. And I pull up, and Felix was pushing up the last wall on the shack that we were living in for harvest. And I was like, all right, here we go. And it was fun, and especially with Felix, it wasn't just the wine, like taking care of ducks or doing whatever's needed to be kind of on that, his little farm there, and he's just salt of the earth. Always has a pot of black beans going, and yeah, it's good. So it was a perfect experience for like a first harvest. So
outside of the kind of the work itself, what did you notice any other kind of what else appealed to you about it? Was it something else that appealed to you about the industry at that point?
At that point, it was just something new, like it created a difference and a depth, and I was like, okay, I didn't think it was going to be something that I was going to do forever. And then you do that first harvest and you're like, oh. And so like you go down and you start chasing and you chase harvest for a few years and you're like, okay. And, but I think it's like, like as I said at the beginning, it's that social aspect of this industry that, you create this layering depth of friends, and it's the same thing of what you're trying to shoot for in that bottle of wine, like you want it to, create a story, and those people all build into the story of your, this whole journey that we've all been on throughout this industry, and the ups and downs and the highs and lows, and yeah.
So after the first harvest, what did you do next?
Drove back to Georgia, and then 3 days later, I was on a plane in New Zealand for a year almost. I worked down at Mud House Wines for the 2010 harvest, and it goes from doing, I think at Carlton Julian we did like 19 tons or so, and then did almost 7,000, and it was just night and day. And like those first couple of weeks, you come from this like organic kind of natural environment, and then it's just tank farms and 11-15 ton presses, and you're working 12-hour shifts. And so it took a second, but then you realize what it's really doing, because that's kind of how most wine's made in the world, and your brain changes. So you go from that creativity aspect to more of learning logistics and learning equipment, and kind of actually what real winemaking kind of is, and so, once you embrace that, it's like, all right, you kind of feel this rhythm. All right, how many rackings can I do at the same time while running the RDV and then helping out your mate? And like, it's just, you get into this hype rhythm. And it was really fun, because I think there was 54 interns from all over the world. And so it was just like 3 months of working hard and having a good time. So, I did that. And so I stayed on at Mud House till August of 2010, and then came back to Georgia, kind of had a couple of weeks of rest, and then drove out to Napa for my first California harvest. I worked at Antica Napa Valley, so an Antinori project up on top of Atlas Peak AVA. Nate Weiss was the winemaker during that time. And it was just, it's another experience. And like, I think that's what I've used in this, is just trying to learn from all these other kind of winemakers, and, seeing how different facilities are set up. And it's, it was just cool. Kind of, Napa was fun. Not sure if I want to be down there permanently, but like, I do enjoy it every once in a while when I get down there. So,
tell me how they compared from as an intern, how the different regions compared for you, and what you kind of gathered from each stop along the way.
It's been interesting, because I do think you've seen a change in internship over the years, especially as things get more expensive and stuff. Like, you go from kind of earlier days where like housing provided and like all these kind of things, and now it's a little bit more independent. And I think it's just region based though. Like in New Zealand, I think we screwed that up. All me and my Italians and my Argentinian friends, like, it was a good time. But, you know, it's just like anything, everything's evolving, and I think every spot's going to be unique, even if you're going back to the same region. It's like the vintage is going to change. It's just number one word in wine, depends. Like, it's just depends on what happens at that time.
At what point along the way did you start to think of this as something you wanted to do long term, or did you have a goal in mind when you were traveling?
You know, you look back at it and you wish you had taken some of it a little bit more serious during that time. But I think it was Napa that really hit me, where it's like, okay, I do think this is what I want to do professionally. I found myself really being captivated by sparkling wine. And, you know, I think I've remembered most things, but like, there's just, you know, there's minute details of, as well as like most wines, like it's off-season work of where you're really kind of putting those polishing and learning those techniques. And so I feel like it is when you get to the point of, you know, full-time work at a space, that's when you're really seeing the full picture, and being able to, you know, complete from start to finish, and, you know, learn the tinkering winemaking aspect of it. But yeah, so after Napa, I definitely thought, I was like, oh, okay, I could see myself like leaning towards white wine / bubbles. So I worked down at Craiglinger Piper's Brook in Tasmania. So I was down there for the 2011 harvest. So it's about an hour and a change outside of Launceston. And 2011, I think, was one of their hardest harvests since like the 70s or something. It was just, we were supposed to do like 1,800 tons or something, and we did 600. And it was, fruit quality was really tough, but again, it was a good time and met some amazing people. And yeah, you saw actually how labor intensive bubbles can be. And so, you know, it's still captivating to me, but it definitely gave me the exposure of like, oh, that's not exactly what I want to do. But I still enjoy the bubbles a lot.
As a consumer, maybe more than a producer, right?
Yeah, it's especially with this valley now, you see how explosive the bubbles scene has been for, you know, everybody's got one now. And it is one of those things, like, what style of bubbles, if it's still bubbly, matters the most, you know? And I think you do taste the layering in it and stuff, but I think like Patrick and I, we do a Tremont style, and we shoot to make it a very high level, but, you know, it's force carb, like, but it bubbles and tastes good. But I think it's cool to see all these different styles of bubbles coming out, and I think it's cool for the industry.
So you mentioned kind of the full-time job as the chance to sort of see the whole process. So at what point did you, what was your next step toward a full-time job?
Well, so after Tassie, I called Patrick because we had met during that 2009 harvest when I started, and I had his Viognier, and I was like, I got to make that eventually. It was real good. And so called him up and came back for the 11 harvest, and yeah, just had a blast with him, working with him. And it was when our facility was still in the granary district, and so Lumos was in there, so you get all this exposure to all these different vineyards for what we're making with Dominio IV and our clients, and with Lumos and Dive, you know, farming Temperance Hill, and working with Julia Cattrall, and Mordecai was our cellar master at the time, and we just, that was a hard harvest. It was definitely one of the more physical harvests that I think I've ever done, but I do think it's a very beautiful classic style of Oregon Pinot that we've definitely seen change over the past 9 years. But yeah, and so after that, finding full-time cellar work's not always like at your doorstep, and so I actually went back to Georgia and it ended up working retail, and that was just a 180, as well as realizing how little like having the exposure, and like especially during trade show season, you're going to 3 trade shows a week and tasting and tasting and tasting, and you're like, okay, and you see the vast and diversity, grapes that or winemakers you never thought you'd meet. It was a brilliant crash course. And yeah, Cindy, our head wine buyer, she educated me a lot and very well, and her palate kind of was one of the first times that like you're working with somebody that actually explains it to you, kind of thing, about the different regions and the processes and like the history of why something's called what it is. And so I tell all people getting in the industry, work at a massive production and work retail. Like that, it gives you such a good base and frame to kind of, your brain can think big to small, but when your brain's only been thinking small, it's hard to like really expand and kind of learn those logistics. And so.
So you're in retail at this point. How do you get back here?
When I left, I told Patrick I was pencil me in for next harvest. I'm coming back, and so I worked 10 months retail, and then loaded up the rig again and drove back out. So I've driven across the country a few times for this harvest gig, and so that was for 12, and talk about a fun harvest. Just getting back and like. It was the first time ever coming back to a region, so you have like established mates around, and like it was fun, and it was good to see everybody again. And that's when I knew I was going to be out here permanently. And for that first year, it was still a hustle aspect. I mean, for my 2013 taxes, I had 8 W-2s. And but it was a lifestyle, and you never felt like you were struggling. It's just, you were just here and trying to, working in so many different facilities, you get to see all these kind of different tools and what people are doing and how they're doing it. So I think it was despite the mild struggle, like it was a good year. Right. And then, so after 13 is when I was kind of full-time with Dominio IV. So so this will be Patrick and I's 11th harvest together. So we know each other pretty well by this point.
Why did you want to be here?
I think it's, I felt like at the beginning, you see the kind of transition to the valley, and so like when I came back in 12, you kind of like, oh, that's a new label, or like, it's expanding as a valley. And definitely how we've seen it over the past years of how many labels have popped up and kind of the diversity of what people are making. You kind of, I think we're in a valley of a really, vast array of mediums. So you can, grow some weird stuff, and people are trying to push boundaries, sometimes a little too hard. But I think here, probably for like the acidity too. Like I like pretty high acid wines, but not like over the top. It needs to be balanced. But Yeah, and it's just kind of, also where you just end up, I was like back in the 2010, I actually was hired up at Book Walter, but then thought Antinori was better on the resume, so could have been in Washington, it's kind of like, just make plans to break plans.
So by the time you got in here, you worked a lot of different places with a lot of different people, obviously a lot of different styles. Tell me about, as you were thinking about making wine and being in a place permanently, tell me about sort of what you had taken away in terms of what you wanted to do, what you wanted to make, and maybe what you didn't want to make, kind of as your philosophy was kind of being honed.
I think, it's tough to say what I don't want to make, because even if it's like a varietal that's not like popular in the market or is thought lesser of, even, like, you still kind of want to make it to a degree that makes people excited about it again, and like I feel like Pinot Gris taking a dip, but then like everybody's starting to make it even at a higher level now, and so it is not as boring as people can make it out to be, but it's because it's how it's made. If you make it with intention, you farm it with intention, it comes through in that glass. Trying to think of what I wouldn't want to make. To not. That's about it. Or Carmenere. It's not my style. But other than that, I call myself a closet cab whore. Like I love a good cab, but white wine doesn't really stay around our house too much. So I really enjoy making white wine. It's kind of, I think it's loads of diversity, and I think you can show an aspect of purity from the vineyard, but also put a little bit of your own unique kind of style on there where, like, keeps it interesting.
What about in terms of style or place? You chose a pretty small place to come back to. Why Dominio IV? What about this place appealed to you?
Probably because we don't rarely do Patrick and I choose the easy way. Like, we're only doing 50. I think we did 52 tons last year, but it turns into like 40 odd lots, because we look at it as like, I think he and I really excel on blending, and so we call it the arsenal, and we want as much kind of tools when we go to blending to create as much layering into it. So between whatever cooperage or yeast we're choosing, but like, we just want to have, you look up and there's 50 barrels, and I want each one of those to be unique, to layered all together. And but yeah, we don't make it easy on ourselves. But I think it comes through in the final product.
Tell me about your sort of initial role here and how it's changed over the years.
Yeah, I was just simple harvest cellar rat, just hanging around until somebody would kick me out. So they kept me. But yeah, so 11 to 13, and then was basically just 13 was kind of part-time when they needed help throughout the year, and then post 13 harvest, Patrick offered me the kind of front of house / part-time cellar hand. So, running wine club, tasting room, all that stuff, which was kind of cool because you connect with, like, some of these wine club members have been around with Patrick and Lee since 2002. So you're like, hearing the stories that they have about seeing what Dominio has grown into. And so did that for about a year and a half, and then took over the cellar in 2015. And yeah, it was, you know, and that's when we were still in the building, and you know, between Dominio IV and our clients, and then with Luma, so it's pretty full on. And in that building, it was, what was our, I think we were at like 6,800 square feet or something, but one floor drain. So a lot of vacuuming, and yeah, you learn to work very clean as possible, just because there wasn't anywhere to go. But yeah, and I think it's, you know, when you work in spaces like that, you know, your brain starts working logistically of, all right, well, we don't have anywhere to go sideways, you got to go up. So you know, you stack 5, 6 high when you have to, and but it was good, you know. It's another thing that kind of just makes your brain, you know, plan for wherever else you go, because you never know what will happen. And especially with us kind of taking over this project out here, you know, a lot of learning curves of logistics and how to set up a brand new winery. I'd never done that. But yeah, we have a little bit more breathing room out here.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell me about moving into this space and all the things you had to learn and figure out.
Yeah, 2018 was that would probably be my only dip of like morale in this industry. We moved out August 1st of 2018. The tasting room had been opened here August of 2017, but the winery wasn't ready basically up until that point. And so we moved. I did all the barrel-to-barrel racking, bottling in like 5 weeks, and then harvest started. And it was a massive harvest, like, and so it was just constant for about 4 months of like no real breathing room. So I was pretty fried by the end of that year, and that's the only time that I was just like, okay, what am I doing? But you know, it was good, and I mean, I love that 2018 harvest. You know, like, if you think it's not what I would consider classic Pinot, but if you're gonna have something like that to be high structure, high acid, high fruit intensity, I do think it is a, you know, pretty monumental vintage for Oregon. But yeah, and we're still, you know, 3 years later, we're still making minute adjustments to the building and being like, all right, well, we'll get to that project now, and now we'll get there. But yeah, it was definitely something of a, you know, an added bonus chapter.
What is sort of the goal here on this site? With all the expansion here, what is the goal with what you can do here that you couldn't do before?
Control. I mean, you know, with Lee being the farmer she is, like, I feel like our fruit quality is always pretty high level between our vineyard and the gorge at 3 Sleeps, and now with us having our own estate Pinot, I think we've planted in a pretty cool kind of array of clones / kind of having different diversity coming down the hill. Lee definitely nixed some of the ideas Patrick and I had. But you know, we've got 7 different clones coming down the hill, and I think we have a pretty cool aspect. And you know, we've worked with fruit from this kind of little sub valley kind of thing. From Patrick's been working with Sturmer since 2005, 2006, and so we're very familiar with that. We've done a couple of vintages with Timble and Time, and so you kind of know what's going to happen around. But yeah, this was, I mean, last year was our first year pulling fruit off, and it wasn't very descriptive of what we feel like the vineyard. just a little haze in the air. So we're really excited about this year, so because we will get a much better aspect of what each parcel is kind of doing and what's, how expressive it is. And I think it will change us as a brand, like Patrick and I like to make SKUs out of, 2011, we made 11 different Pinots. So it was, I think it either simplifies us or will create more headache, but either way we'll figure it out once we get there. But I think it'll be cool to kind of just have a wee bit more control over what, our farming practices are, and kind of showcasing the site.
So tell me about working with Patrick and Lee and what you've sort of learned from them over the years.
They're just, I think that's another reason I'm quasi-institutionalized. Like they're just salt of the earth, and just a constant aspect of support for your job as well as personal life. Like they are my bosses, but they're also like some of my best friend. And especially with Patrick, he's given me a platform to kind of have a lot of autonomy with his brand, and I feel like he does trust me more and more. And but also I think we feed off each other really well, because we have different palates, but the goal's the same. And I think it's always trying to heighten and increase that level of depth in the wine. So it rarely, as good friend says, dogma does not make terroir driven wine. So it's constantly adjusting and trying to make it better. If something is working, hone in on that, but let's see what this does too. So I think, and then Lee's just a badass farmer. So I couldn't imagine being anywhere else, especially with how supportive they are.
So your role now as associate winemaker here. Tell me what that means. What does it mean to be an associate winemaker?
It's just a title. You're still doing it all, and I think I hope it was given to me in the aspect of it's just like us working as associates together. It's, to me, it's not like a aspect of ego of like I'm the associate winemaker, unless it needs to be. But it's still cleaning drains and doing tanks and rackings, and it is still making sure you're reading and learning and trying to figure out new techniques and stuff. But I'm still just doing everything else a standard cellar rat would do. But I think it's good. I'm a little bit of a control freak, so I think like the cellar gives me like a comfort of organized chaos. And so did I answer the question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
You mentioned clients. Tell me about working with clients outside of the Dominio IV brand.
Yeah, so we've made wine for an array of people. So Dominio IV, we have an umbrella company, Missing Silo Wines. So that's our umbrella, and that's Patrick and Scott Flora with Native Flora Wines started that company in 2009, I believe. And so our biggest two clients are Dominio IV and Native Flora. But we also, Patrick's been making wine for Bella Vita for the 2-row program, and then in 2012, I believe, or 13, we started making their Riesling, which was a pretty fun little Pinot Gris Riesling But yeah, it was great working with Steve and Allison. And then who else have we done? We were making for a brand called Expression 44, which is a California-based group. And so we were kind of working with some rose rock fruit, which was pretty fun. And then 2014, we brought on John Zelko with Zevo Wines. And talk about the easiest client. Like, we put his wine to tank for this very first time, 2014, and it was supposed to be a whole cluster blend and a main lane blend, and we did all of our trials, and we're just like, oh, everything together works. And he shows up with labels, and he was like, no, this is what was supposed to happen. We're like, whew, got away with that one. But it was awesome working with that fruit. He had, we were making his Pinot for him, and a little bit of rosé, and then in 2017, we made some Chardonnay for him, and that I do think that Zevo Vineyard is a very distinct terroir-driven site. Like you definitely know those wines, especially on the white cells, especially from you taste the Pinot Blancs and Chardonnay, you're like, oh, you see totally two different grapes and very strong similarities between the two. And I'm trying to think who else we've made for. We did 2018, we did Toomey. So Silver Oaks sister winery, which was awesome because Nate Weiss is their big title, Silver Oak, whatever that is. But he's basically managing the whole system, and so it was awesome working with him again. Like, love that dude. And yeah, it was a good time hanging out with him and Chris Burrows. So yeah, we had a good time. But other than that, yeah, it's just depends on the year. They come and go. I have a little project I make for called Cougar's Mart. Michael Smith's the proprietor for that, so he lets me have a bit of fun with some Pinot, and I make a little Pinot Gris for him. And I think that's it.
When it comes to working with clients like that, tell me about that, sort of building that relationship and that trust, and making wines that work for the people you're making them for.
I think it's tough in the sense of also making, understanding what they want. Like I would say, it takes a few years to figure out the vineyard. I think that's the same with the client, and understanding what they want from the wine. Because I think a lot of people think they know what they want, and then it comes down to like, oh no, that's actually what I wanted. And so I think it's just a healthy guide, because they're hiring you, and hopefully it's because they've tasted our wines that we're making. Oh, I want to be in that facility. So I think it's a little bit of like putting the trust in our hands. And we're very lucky with all of our clients of how easy they really are. I've heard some horror stories out there about relationships ending and not being on a positive light. So, yeah. But it is a lot of trust, and I feel that I take that responsibility pretty seriously, of like saying like, you're paying for this, but I want it to taste like this. I want it to feel like this is over delivering, and you want to keep making these vintages with us.
So if you had to sum up your sort of winemaking philosophy or winemaking style, how would you describe it?
I think style is always evolving. I mean, for me, like, just drinking the nerdiest shit back in the day, and then all of a sudden be like, I want to be a little bit more balanced, because I think your palate also gets more educated, and so like, you're like, oh, okay, and you start tasting different wines, and you're like, oh, you see that layering and like, all right, acid can have fruit and oak, and like I do like acid and oak together. I think it's, you know, and so stylistically, I wouldn't say I have a style, because I think that's with the client winemaking. I wouldn't say like, you know, I don't ever want to, like, I'm not a good reductive winemaker. That would be one style that it would take me a bit of effort to kind of fully understand, because I don't know, it's just not what I feel like hone in on. But style, yeah, I don't know. I think it's, you know, like I said, that just puts you into a dogmatic aspect, and with the array of vintages we've seen over the past 10 years, you have to think differently, or, you know, the same thing you did in 12 did not work in 13. And same, you know, if you're making it the exact same way every time, are you doing the vineyard justice? And so I think you have to be able to mold and adapt and kind of think in different ways. So I think styles, you know, for me personally, I know what the styles we're making for certain labels we're hitting consistently, but I wouldn't say as a winemaker I'm like this style. Which I'm sure if people tasted my stuff, they'd be like, no, I get it. Like, yeah, some of the stuff I've made and sent home to mom and dad, mom's like, oh, yep, you like your acid. I was like, I didn't find it that bad.
The harshest critics of all, right?
Yeah, but like also supportive, you know. My brother's always joking about how I manipulate my mom's palate so bad, and like even beer, and he's just, yeah, he takes a good mick out of me for it. But no, I'm very lucky to have all the opportunities I've had. Like, I'm extremely lucky for, you know, my parents and my siblings, and like my partner and my kids allowing me to have this, you know, artistry lifestyle. They endure 3 months of hell every year, so appreciate you guys. So I, you know, it's the full composite of, you know, people here that, you know, give me the platform to excel at something I really love to do, and I don't know what else I would be doing.
So you made a reference earlier to 2020 and the interesting year that it was. So let's talk about the pandemic first of all. I'm curious from your perspective, sort of initial reaction to the pandemic last spring, and how it changed or affected your work life last year.
It was really stressful. Like, Courtney and I have a high-risk daughter, and so like we locked down pretty early, and you know, I think it's like anything these days. You want?
Go ahead.
Okay, it's a tractor. Personally, I felt anxiety just because, like, it's the unknown, and not like where it's a harvest unknown, where you kind of have that ability to guide. I think it was definitely like, what is this? Like, what is, you know, COVID, or, you know, I think it was just so many variables that weren't being answered. So yeah, those first couple of months were pretty high anxiety, and, you know, you get to bond with your family really well, but like, it didn't. I think it was tough because we had kind of, even despite Dominio IV being around since 2002, we were still kind of like new kids on the block. Like, we were, you know, out in the hills now, and like developing relationships with different wineries around here, and so like you saw this great influx of support from consumers, and then you're like, oh, we're shut down, and so like takes the wind out of the sails a little bit. But I mean, luckily people still drink. But overall for my work, it didn't affect me too bad. With Patrick and I being pretty much the only ones in the cellar on a day-to-day basis, and me most days just kind of doing the standard cellar life, like it's pretty safe. And so that transition, and then like just the adjustments getting closer to harvest of safety and protocol, and you know, the awkwardness of like, do we shake hands? Nope, can't do that. You know, you just, you know, like I don't like that. Like I like, you know, the social environment and wanting people to like come to the farm and be relaxed about it. And I think, you know, our front of house staff has done a great job of making people, once we were able to reopen, come but feel comfortable. And I think also people were just ready to get out again. But I think, you know, they did a really good job of, you know, making sure that this was a place that you could come, enjoy a flight or a glass of wine, and feel comfortable again. You know, try to get back to some form of normalcy. So, and if we ever do.
Maybe someday. And of course, the other part of 2020 was, as you mentioned, harvest and the difficulties there. So tell us about kind of the reaction to and the strategies for dealing with the harvest under the smoke last year.
A lot of shooting from the hip. You know, I had went and picked up something on the west side of Portland, drove over Bald Peak, and 2 hours later it's on fire. And I was just like, oh God, here we go. Because you had that one going, then you had the Hag Lake, then you had the Saint-Yam, and you're kind of like, okay, what's happening? And I feel like we were still kind of on the early side for picking, but you know, you just had to pull that trigger. And it was definitely learning. You know, you're talking to people all over the place, people that experience it almost every year. And with our array, I mean, with Dominio, we're sourcing Grenache and Viognier from Southern Oregon, our Three Sleeps vineyard in the Gorge. And so you're having to think about all those factors of where all this different fruit are coming. And yeah, that was winemaking, and not in the same aspect of like a 13 or a 19 of like fine tuning and kind of really pulling it out. It was techniques that you're just like, oh God, yeah. Because, you know, some of those things just totally changed your chemistry. And it'll be interesting seeing what hits the market. And it's tough. 2020 was going to be such a great year. Just, yeah. For winemakers, not for growers, 'cause the set was a little low, but just, it was going to be an awesome harvest. And so, and I think it was just like the cherry on top of the screw you 2020 Sunday. Like, it was like, really? We just couldn't have one little element of like a ray of sunshine for this year. That was a learning curve, and you know, there's always next year. So.
You talk about some of the kind of the shooting from the hip aspect of things. I'm curious with sort of decisions and strategies you had to employ with those grapes, and deciding to pick and deciding what to do with them once you picked them. Tell me about that process for you.
I mean, I was pretty proud of our facility because we didn't reject any fruit. You know, we'll still give it the old college try. And because it was also learning for us. Like, I think there's techniques that we saw in that process that also might be implemented on a good year anyways. Like, just, but you know, we definitely made less red wine, pressed things early, you know, white Pinot. It's all the rage people. But I think that was one thing. Like, I think the whites are pretty good, and like escaped a bit of the smoke, and so we're still working on techniques now to kind of pull out some of those polyphenols and glycols out of the wine now, and trying to make it into, something pretty.
So if you can think back for me, tell me about your initial impressions of the Oregon wine industry and of the wines here and of the industry itself? What was your initial impression?
I feel like I kind of joke and say like I got on the coattail of the good old days, and then you've seen the investment and like the changing of like where people are putting a lot of time and effort and finances into these labels and tasting rooms, and you're just saying, really, okay, like we're kind of growing up a bit, for good and for bad. But I think it's changed just a little bit on the aspect of like the purity kind of thing, and it's turned into more of logistics and business, which is not a bad thing. I think like having those finances come in, you're seeing different farming practices and what people kind of like. I think everybody's goal is still to keep this valley at a very high level, and it is good to see that like our wine quality is still staying at a certain level, and to be kind of respected throughout the world and for what we're doing. And I mean, we're pretty consistent in the valley and at making a high-level product. So, yeah.
What about as you look ahead for the industry? What's it going to look like in the coming years, from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, it'll be. It's kind of tough because so much has changed so quickly that I think how much there's still plenty of land to plant, but I don't know if we need to at this time. I'm more curious about like what kind of varieties people are going to start really kind of pushing around here, because I do think we can grow quite a wide array. Not always as ripe as I think people think they are, but what we're seeing with climate change. What's happening with our water table. You look at the Willamette River right now, and it is very low, and so I think that's going to be the thing that kind of determines a lot of our future is climate and environment, and that kind of aspect of competition. But I don't know. We'll see.
What about as you look ahead for yourself?
Like I said, I'm pretty institutionalized. I don't know. I would, I'd like to expand our client base a little bit more. We do have, one client has basically a winery ready in dormancy for when we expand into how big we want to get. But yeah, I want to keep focusing in and keep ourselves at a higher standard and kind of, be your own harshest critic and, drop your ego and just make some damn wine.
Are there any projects for either for you yourself or for Dominio IV that you're looking forward to? Anything you're looking forward to trying or experimenting with?
I'm always curious on different cooperages. I think that matching a cooperage with either the vineyard or kinetics of like fermentation is kind of fun. Really excited to see what this property is going to produce. I mean, we have Pinot and Chard, but we also have some Pinot Meunier planted, some Albarino, and some Sauvignon Blanc. And when we can find Chenin Blanc, we'll get that in the ground too. So, yeah, more white grapes, but yeah, it'll be fun to see kind of what this hillside's got to offer. Trying to think. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like right now we're at a spot, you know, we're making such a diverse portfolio that it's you're always pretty entertained and, you know, playing around with the aspect of extended élevage in certain degrees and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Any thoughts on making your own wine at some point?
Yeah, no. I mean, like I said, Patrick gives me so much autonomy that, like, I feel like I'm able to express myself, and I mean, if somebody's paying you to do it, like, making wine's easy, selling it's a pain in the ass. So, yeah. If I ever get to like a thing of like somebody's not doing this that I want to see or something like that, maybe, but as of right now, I'm having too much fun. I'm in a good spot. So
that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here that we should have covered?
I don't know. I think we're pretty covered bases.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for your hospitality. Really appreciate this and your great answers. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.